Well, my name is Gabriel Hancock, and I have the privilege of introducing Dr. Hall, and I'm now like the third person to introduce Dr. Hall this weekend, and so I just thought I'd have some fun. So Pastor Nathaniel is a Gen Xer, and he introduced him in the first workshop. I am just the worship and family pastor, and I'm a millennial. So I'm going to have some fun with my introduction. Are we okay with that, Dr. Hall? In poem form. From usher to preacher, from youth to the wise, Dr. Hall leads with love and a heart supersized. At Elizabeth Baptist, he started with cheer, serving in roles year after year. He sang in the choir, he prayed at the mic, he led young adults on their faith-building hike. With passion and purpose, ordained in due time, he preached at Conyers with wisdom sublime. But God had a vision, a bold new way, so the Way Community Church launched one fine day. A church plant with purpose, fresh roots in the ground where love, grace, and truth abundantly abound. He preaches the word with both fire and grace to people of every age, tribe, and place. With kids and with elders, he builds up the team, uniting all hearts in God's glorious dream. And behind every sermon, each bold proclamation is his mission to love through God's holy foundation, with Ebony beside him and sons full of joy. Yes, 3 lively lads, not 1, not 2, but 3 boys. So welcome this leader with wisdom and flair who will teach us to lead with compassion and care. Let's grow and be stretched. Come, answer the call with our speaker, our guide, the one and only Dr. Hall. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you, bro. That was awesome. I appreciate that very, very much. I may have to take the recording of that back to my church. But thank you all for having me. As I've already stated, but I just want to reiterate, I am grateful to have been invited by Ed and his team, and to have been welcomed so hospitably by Marie and Ken. And then I met a few people last night, like Matt and Jana, and then Nathan and Pastor Nathaniel today, and so many of you who just made this a friendly place for me and my son Dylan, who are visiting for a few days. I do have a book out in the lobby, and my goal in this session is to kind of share some of the things in the book, but more of an application to how to apply this generational science to the way that we lead and relate and interrelate with people of different generations. I'm gonna start out with a question that I think may be obvious, but I just wanna kind of level set the tone in the room. How many people, by show of hands, have ever had a frustrating time trying to influence someone of a different age than you? All right, so look around. You're not the only one. All right, we've all had a frustrating time trying to influence people of different ages. Now, I have many lumps as a leader. I am almost 3 years into being a senior pastor, but position doesn't necessarily mean leadership. All right, leadership is influence, John Maxwell would say. It is trying to exercise my capacity to move a person to think, feel, or do something that is good for them to do. That's what leadership is. And I've got many lumps, not just as a leader. Most of my lumps come from my time as a follower. So there are 3 men in my life who have been a leader for me in very key ways. What's interesting is they are all Gen Xers by generation. One is my father. He is a retired naval commander. My dad served in the Navy for 31 years. He retired, I believe, as a 06. For those who understand, military terminology. He retired as a young man, and he worked another 10 or 15 years on the civilian side. And he's prepared soon to retire again. So my father is not just a Gen Xer, but you can imagine as a naval commander, he's also a very strong and dominant leader. And I've struggled at times with him trying to influence me, right? As a millennial, I can be very millennial-like when it comes to my father, and there are lumps there to prove it. We got into, I think, one of our fiercest disagreements, probably about 7 or 8 years ago. I was already in my 30s, and we disagreed about something, and we're both Darrell. So he's Darrell, I'm Darrell. So I was gonna prove to him who the real Darrell was. And I'm not like my siblings. I'm not like my brother and my sisters. You're gonna respect me, you know what I'm saying? And needless to say, I was wrong. I definitely overshot not just my emotions, but the way I handled my emotions. We forgave each other, loved each other. I wrote this book, Speaking Across Generations. One Saturday morning, I'm sleeping in and my phone rings, and it's my dad. He's calling me from a hotel in New York, and he's got one of the original copies of my book, one of the first 20 copies. I signed it and autographed it to him, sent it to him. I didn't know he was gonna read the whole book cover to cover and then call me while I was sleeping in on the Saturday and talk to me for 3 hours. Almost 3 hours we stayed on the phone. I mean, I haven't washed my face, I haven't brushed my teeth, no coffee, no anything. Because he calls me, wakes me up, and just goes into not just how proud of me he is, but how we can better understand each other now, based on some of the things he read, of all places, in my book. And from that point forward, we were able to appreciate what it means to influence each other, to lead each other, which is really based in our love for each other. That's my dad. Then I got 2 bosses who I know I have stressed out. And now that I got some grays poking through on my beard, I'm sure that many of the grays on my bosses' heads are from me. All right. One of those bosses, I worked in a law firm before I came on staff in my church. And in my early 20s, I was what he described as a little punk. All right, spoken like only an attorney type A personality could tell you to your face, which means whenever he was stern, I would pout. Whenever he was unflinching, I would be fluctuating. Whenever he was what I thought hard or tough, I would want to play the victim and fold. And it was difficult for him to try to relate to me because there was so much emotion in how I interpreted what he just meant to be emotionless leadership. Time has evolved. We've now become friends so much so that I officiated his wedding. I eulogized his father about 2 weeks ago. And our relationship has been able to evolve because I think we better understand that Gen Xers were led by boomers who lead differently than millennials interpret leadership. And giving each other the space to be while evolving in our relationship has helped us to better relate to one another. I think it also helps that I don't work for him anymore. So, there's that. But our friendship has grown nonetheless. And then my last boss, my most recent boss, my senior pastor. The church I was born and raised in, I was a part of until I was 35 years old. I'm 39 now. And my home church planted the church I'm pastoring now. So the church I pastor now is the second church I've ever been a part of. The first 35 years of my life, I was a part of one church. And this church is an amazing church in the Atlanta area, Elizabeth Baptist Church. And from the time I was 8 years old, I've had the same pastor, so for 31 years. So this man has watched me, helped me, led me, and stewarded my spiritual growth through every season imaginable. Literally, from elementary school. Any change I've gone through from elementary school to now, he's been a presence in my life to help steward that. Well, our relationship grew. I was in a volunteer capacity. Then he hired me to be on staff hire me to be on the team. And I started to realize his leadership sensibilities, even though he was Gen Xer, his leadership sensibilities were very much autocratic, meaning what he say goes. Well, he didn't know that I was very much millennial because what he says has to be matched by what I say. And then what I say should influence what he said, and then what he said goes, but it's really what I said that he said goes. So many lumps, many times of frustrating moments trying to not just be pastored spiritually, but to be led as my boss in a work capacity. And what I've learned as a young leader is it's not just the leader's job to do the work, to improve that relationship. It's the follower's job to do the work as well to improve that relationship. And my goal today is just to share some research that went into the book, but then to apply it, or I think a better word would be extrapolate it out to this leadership dynamic that has, for many of us, created frustration in our homes, right? Like with me and my father. In our workplaces, like with me and my bosses. Or in our church, like with me and my pastor. I've experienced frustration in leadership relationships in all three areas, and in those ways, I was the follower who was creating, so to speak, or helping to create this frustration. So there are a few thoughts on the screen if you want to track with me. Here's the first thought. Doug Webster is a great thinker and theologian, one of my professors from Beeson Divinity School. He said that Western culture's generational segregation leads to a significant relational fragmentation and disorientation. Woo! That's a wordy sentence, but it's true, isn't it? What Dr. Webster is saying is that the New Testament doesn't subdivide generations in the way Western culture does. That there's a cultural thing in America that has some good and is meant to be good, but also can create some frustration and irritation as an underbelly or fallout of what was intended to be good. And what he's saying is this segregation of generations leads to relational fragmentation, meaning the brokenness of how to relate to each other, how to love one another, how to understand one another, how to influence one another, as a result of being in separate generations. All right. He goes on to say that this is not a fault of any particular generation. Go to the next thought for me, Dale. I skipped this one, but he says this is not the fault of any particular generation, but the multi-generational nature of the household of God is a New Testament expectation. So let's back up. What he's saying is the culture has fragmented us generationally, but spiritually, the concept of household of God is a New Testament metaphor for what the church is supposed to be. What do you mean, Darrell? What I mean is a household, by definition, is intergenerational. So the New Testament church, there's this obvious expectation that people of all ages would have the gospel in common, and that the gospel would be enough to help us bear one another's burdens, forgive one another as Christ has forgiven us, love one another as Christ has loved us, to practice these one another's in intergenerational community. Now, when he talks about generational segregation or fragmentation, he could be talking about this picture, all right? What it looks like for generations to be subdivided or split up in a way. Go to the next slide for me, Deal. Here's the generational divide at the time of my research, where only adult population is represented. And so what I have here is a timeline and generational names that you may recognize. Like if you were born in 1945 or before, you would be considered the silent generation. All right. The greatest generation is what we would call you. Anybody born in 1945 or earlier? One right here. Man, you look great for your age. Can we thank God for him? Can we give God praise for him? That is awesome. God bless you, sir. We had two in the previous segment. All right. Then you got baby boomers, those born between 1946 and 1964. Where are all the selfish people in the room? All right, thank you, thank you. I mean baby boomers, I'm sorry. Do your own thing. All right, all the baby boomers in the room. Baby boomers are, or were, the largest generation in American history, the most live births, and the highest population. And the world retrofitted itself, wrapped itself around baby boomers, the apple of America's eye, the apple of America's economy, marketing strategy, city planning, companies growing, suburbs and subdivisions being developed. All of this was to meet and appeal to the sensibility of baby boomers. Then you got Gen Xers, born between 65 and 83. Any Xers in the room? Any Xers in the room? All right. These are the middle children of America. All right? And I say that having 3 sons, fully knowing that my middle son is just unique. My middle son is unique, right? Gen Xers in many ways are wedged between the 2 largest generations in American history. And it can feel like Gen Xers are skipped over. What's interesting is boomers were the largest generation. Xers, right behind boomers, were the smallest, or are the smallest generation in American history. The least amount of live births. The smallest population compared to the baby boomer generation right before them. Now, Gen Xers are also the generation that had its hearts collectively broken by the failure of many institutions that Xers were told to trust. The family failed Gen Xers. The government failed Gen Xers. Major companies and organizations failed Gen Xers. Religion failed Gen Xers. What do I mean? Their parents divorced at a 55% clip. My parents are both Xers. My grandparents are all boomers. My dad's parents are both deceased, and I had to eulogize both of them, which was a lot. And my grandparents, my paternal grandparents, were married on paper for 60 years. But in an actually healthy dynamic, probably not many years. My mom's parents, my maternal grandparents, were married maybe 3 years and divorced by the time my mom was 5 years old. All right? Their parents divorced at a 55% clip. In my family, is true for both of my parents' parents. They also witnessed many scandals, government scandals, religious scandals, major organizations and corporations stealing the pension funds of their parents and people who work hard. So every institution, for the most part, Xers were told to trust. And on top of that, latchkey kids. So in many ways, self-sufficient from a young age, probably too young, right? Those are Xers. Now, the benefit Xers have is Xers help to bring in the information age, the internet, post-secondary education, access to knowledge became a reality for Xers. So what I said in the last segment, I want to re-say now, and that is this. Xers use their brains to guard their hearts because their hearts were broken while their brains were being filled with more knowledge. The most access to knowledge of any generation up to that point, coupled with the broken heart from every institution failing you, creates this tension of also being the smallest generation in American history of self-sufficiency. So Xers require mental stimulation before the heart can be influenced. If you want to lead someone who is of this age group, you have to be able to first appeal here before they give you access here. All right. Then you got the millennials, born in the 80s and 90s. Where are the millennials in the room? Yep, that's us. Leave us alone. All right, can't you tell it makes us sad when you talk about us? Especially when it's true. Right? We have this unique relationship with the truth. We are so opinionated that, the truth may not necessarily be how we see it. Gen Xer said, what's true for you is true for you, and what's true for me is true for me. We took it a step further and we just said, live your own truth. So we've got this awkward relationship with facts because opinions and dialogue is just the culture of our age group. And so it hurts our feelings when you tell the truth about us, especially while we're around. All right? So we're born in the 80s, born in the 90s. Millennials are now the largest generation in American history. We have more live births than baby boomers had in their window of time. We also have more population currently alive. And so if the Xers feel skipped over, that makes sense, because Xers are wedged as the smallest group between the two largest groups. And the world, in a way, just kind of skipped Xers in the sense of a real shot to lead, influence, have certain seats of power and authority. A lot of organizations are either holding on to boomer sensibilities or completely skipping over to the millennial group. That's my group, all right? And then Gen Z are those who were born in the late 90s up to the mid 2000s, and Gen Zs are very relational, okay? In the first segment, I just showed the heart hands. Everybody do this with me, heart hands, heart hands. If you wanna reach Gen Zers, you need to practice this in the mirror 10 times a day. Just heart hands, heart hands, heart hands, right? Get those heart hands ready. You can reach Gen Zers, you can appeal to them. They just want you to love them. And they want you to be human as you love them, all right? The more human you are, the more your leadership will appeal to younger generations. The more authoritative you are, the more your leadership will appeal to older generations. And here in a few minutes, I'll show you this continuum that's based on the languages in my book, and then also the way we outsource that or outlay that onto leadership here in a minute. Now, let's go to life stages real quick. So I want to highlight 2 life stages because these are different than generational people groups. Generation is when you were born. Life stage is where you are now in your life. And as we age through stages. And these stages nuance what we need. And as those needs change, leadership is held to a different accountability to help meet those needs. Now, there are 2 life stages I want to focus on. Go to the next slide for me, Dylan. And they are emerging adulthood and second adulthood. And I emphasized this earlier. I want to re-emphasize it. How many people was in the first group you were in speaking across? Okay, good. So most of us weren't. So y'all let me kind of build them back up to where we were. Okay. The 2 key life stages I want to emphasize are the life stages emerging adulthood, second adulthood. Emerging adulthood is what sociologists are using to describe this phenomenon of what we would call boomerang kids, right? If you throw them out into the world, they go to college, they graduate or not, and they come back home. And they move right back into the room you thought you threw them out of. And they seem content to do so. While they demand that you respect them as an adult, but also request that you pay their phone bill next month. Emerging adults. Now, sociologists would say that this age or this stage ends about 29 years old, but it's not really a time thing, it's a life experience thing, all right? That an emerging adult is a person who can feel stuck in extended adolescence until they do one of these few things, either get married, have children, a sustainable job where they can care for themselves economically, or get like a mortgage or some kind of, commitment to a living space that they can call their own. Until multiple of those decisions are made within a short window of time, a 20-something may feel stuck in this space where they are legal, they can vote, they can drink, they can drive, they can work, they just can't stand on their own. And this can create frustration for boomer parents. Reason being is because when you were thrown out into the world, there was no option to come back. As a matter of fact, you probably said to yourself, I'm leaving and I'm not coming back. But the truth is, the world you left into made it easier to not come back than the world 20-somethings are leaving into. Now, I'm gonna give you an example. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, she is the second oldest of 11 children. And she lived in a little town called Abbeville, Alabama. And they had a rough upbringing. Her parents and her home was emotionally unstable. I think I could say that. And after they graduated, they all left and never returned. Right? My grandmother was born in 1952. She's the second oldest of 11. So from the 50s up to the late 60s, these baby boomer kids all left this small town and this difficult home they were raised in and never returned. Never returned to live with their parents. Now, fast forward 25 years to me and my wife and our siblings, and it's completely different. I'm the oldest of 4 in my mom's house. My wife is the oldest of 4. She's got 2 younger sisters and a younger brother. I've got 3 younger sisters in my mom's house. My dad, I got other siblings there. Between the 8 of us, me and my wife are the only 2 who left and stayed out. We're the only 2 of the 8. The other 6, 3 of them lived with our parents until they were in their 30s. Another 3 of them lived with us for an extended period of time. One of them still lives at home with my mom to this day. And that's just the way it is now. Now, I personally think my younger siblings are lazy, but that's another conversation for another day. That was a joke, by the way, or not. I don't know what it is. It's just these middle kids and these younger kids. They just get to do what they want to do. I got a bias. I'm sorry. I'm the oldest. I haven't forgiven them yet. But that's very much normal. It's very much normal now for 30 to be the new 20. And that can create relational frustration for the adult who's trying to emerge and for the parent who hopes that they will finally emerge. All right, that's one life stage. Here's the next life stage, second adulthood. Now this, particularly at this time of my life, is one of my favorite to think about, study, read about, encourage people. Baby boomers are the first group to go through second adulthood, and Gen Xers are right there now with you. Second adulthood is this time between about 55 and 69, when you are too old to be considered young. Sorry to break the news to you. Also, you are too young to be considered old. So you're in this window. Who said yay? Yay. Yeah, you can be both. You're in this window where you're old enough to retire, but too young to pull from your pension. You're in this time where your previous life has changed. You did something for 25 or 30 years that you don't have to do anymore. Whether that's raising a family, working a corporate job, maybe you were in the military, maybe you were a teacher, maybe you work for the post office. The point is that first act is gone. And your life looks way different and you look a little different than you did in that time in your life. But you've got enough youth, energy, health, vitality, resources, and time to not just make another impact, but to make your greatest impact. Second adulthood is this new phenomenon that boomers and Xers are really pioneering, because boomers were the first group to move really and create these cities and suburbs and subdivisions and major corporations. And so to really be a generation of professionals, so to speak, and now have a life after profession, there's this line in the sand or this demarcation in time that gives you a chance to redefine yourself and renegotiate how you enter the world. So I want to encourage you, if you are between 55 and 69, or if you're close to that age, to do all you can to get clear on your values. Everybody say values. Hold on, I'm gonna open my water. It's your values that matter most in second adulthood, not skills. Because chances are you learn skills that you needed in your first act, skills that you needed to survive or earn money or care for a family. And those skills may not be needed, but just because those skills aren't needed doesn't mean your values don't matter. And if you're clear on your values, you still have enough capacity to learn new skills. I was just out at the table, and I think the man's name was Brad. He said, this was my first time using Venmo to pay for something. I said, was it easy? He said, nope. I said, well, thank you for pressing through. Right? He's in the world now of e-paying or electronic payments or not needing real cash to actually buy something. Your skills may not be needed, but your values are. And if you can get clear on your values, hear me, you have the capacity to learn new skills. You may have to overcome some fear, some anxiety as you do it, and I've had to pastor people through this. My congregation is intergenerational. I pastor people old enough to be my parents and people young enough that I could be their parents. And I've had to walk with people through the uncertainty of letting go of the life they knew to become the next version or iteration of themselves. So I want to encourage all the 50-somethings in the room to really take advantage of second adulthood. That's where you can make your most impact. Now, there are 3 things I want to share with you. If you want to become an intergenerational leader, if you want to become a leader who can influence people regardless of age, here are 3 things that I would suggest or encourage you to think about. The first one is to become omnilingual. The second one is to become cross-cultural. And the last of all, to be strategic and intentional. Now, I am starting from the belief that you can do this. If I can learn how to follow older leaders and then learn how to lead older people, anybody can learn how to lead someone born at a different time than them. To be omnilingual, what I mean is to not just learn the language of each generation, but know how to use them interchangeably. How many people, by show of hands, were here last night? You were at the service last night. Okay. What I was trying to do last night is display how to preach the gospel in each generational language. And I'll show you those languages in a minute. But it was the same message, John 3:16. It was just expressed differently depending upon the generational tongue or language I was using. If you want to be an intergenerational leader, I want to encourage you to learn the generational languages and also learn how to use them. I believe you can do it. Also, to be cross-cultural. See generations as people groups, right? I think we already do this in the negative. I just want us to do it in the positive. We already do it in the negative, meaning we think people of other generations are barbarians. Right? Oh, these barbaric millennials, when will they evolve and become human? We already feel this foreignness, this otherness from people of a different age. We feel alienated from them automatically. That's in the negative. In the positive, we can intentionally become cross-cultural. That means to learn how they see the world and why they see it that way. Give them space, being of a different age and time, to have their unique perspective, and then know how to engage them on that perspective on a multitude of issues like politics, economics, marriage and relationship, family, blase. And then strategic and intentional, which I'll show you a few things and I'll share a couple books I'm going to encourage you to read. Here's our big idea. I want us to read this together, our opening thought. All right, I want us to read this opening thought together on a count of 3. Go to the next one for me, Deal. Oh, I don't have the opening thought. All right, listen to this opening thought. I cannot influence people I do not love, and I cannot love people I refuse to understand. Say that with me. I cannot influence people I do not love, and I cannot love people I refuse to understand. So there's a connection there between influence, love, and understanding. Influence is leadership. Love has to be the motivation. Understanding increases the capacity. If I want to influence people, I've got to love them. And if I really claim to love them, I should do the work to try to understand them. Now, what we see here is, you can go to the next one now, Dylan. Thank you, son. All right, what we see here is the language of each generation. So when I talk about us being omnilingual, able to speak the language of the generations, what I mean is that elders, or the greatest generation, their language could be defined as propositional. Boomers, skeptical. Xers, intellectual. Millennials, dialogical or dialogue. Gen Zers, relational. Now, this is not just a hunch. These are the findings of extensive research for me. All right, so my book, Speaking Across Generations, started out as a dissertation in my doctorate work at Beeson Divinity School at Sanford University. And so what I did was I engaged in focus groups with my congregation at the time, and I learned from them what they thought made a sermon effective. So, I was just trying to be a good student and a good pastor and graduate school. Well, finished school, and a friend of mine caught word about my research and connected me with a research VP at Barner Group and sent my dissertation to them. So they read the dissertation, and I didn't think much about it. I was finished with school. They called me and they said, "Hey, Darrell, we think you have something. Would you be willing to come in and have lunch with us?" I'm like, "Sure." So I go to lunch in Atlanta with the research team from Barner Group at their Atlanta office. So we're sitting there. This is about 2019. We're sitting there eating lunch, and I'm spitballing this idea that generations of people groups, and they got their own language. And here's what I discovered, here's what I think. And if you're like a nerd, like, what I'm saying, you know how you can nerd out on something that nobody else cares about but you? So I'm just thinking, I'm gonna just nerd out, get some free lunch, meet some cool people, it's all good. They're like, "No, man, we think you have something. Let's create a unique experiment and see if we can't really get some data that backs this up." So that's what we did. We designed this experiment where we took 10 preachers and their sermon audio and sermon excerpts. So you can read a piece from their sermon, or you can listen to a piece from their sermon. And we sent this out to 1,000 adults across the United States, across multiple states. Half of them were churched, other half would describe themselves as non-religious or unchurched. And we had them listen to the sermon audios, read the sermon excerpts, and select which one they preferred or rank them, then give us the the year they were born. And we started to see a correlation between the year or time frame someone was born, generation, and the type of preaching they preferred. Now, in our research, we used 10 preachers, 2 from each generation. 2 born before 45, 2 boomers, 2 Xers. Y'all picking up what I'm putting down? All right. 5 were African American, 5 were white. Okay? So that there was a racial mix there. All 10 of the preachers we used were males, not because, I didn't support women in ministry, but because we didn't know how to account for the bias of the listener against a female voice. So that bias could skew the data, and we had no way to measure that as a real factor in the experiment. Anywho, we do this experiment, and we get this data back, and would you know it? It was more than just a hunch. It was actually a real thing. We saw a correlation between generation and preferred language in preaching. So then what I did was I took that data and went and looked at communication trends during each generation's coming of age years. So think like from about 10 years old to about 25 years old. And I looked at technology, politics, and communication trends as each generation was coming of age. And there's a correlation between the generation who heard FDR say on the radio, right, talk about the war on the radio, to desiring propositional communication. One-way communication. There's a connection there. There's also a connection to millennials who were born with a bottle in one hand and a two-way pager in the other. There's a connection between that and dialogue as a preference for communication. So I just made a mistake and found something cool. And God let me write a book, which was fun, right? So from that, these languages describe how these generations want to hear platform communication. And if you can learn these languages, you can use them to influence. So what I mean by propositional for elders is firm, direct, unflinching, clear. No funny business, right? Say what you're gonna say what you said you was gonna say, and then when you're done saying it, say, I told you that's what I was gonna say, right? When you get to boomers like a little skeptical language. Boomers are the Woodstock generation, the generation of hippies, right? I know y'all are dignified now and very respectful, and I honor my elders. I respect you. But I also know from research, I wasn't there to see it, but I heard about it, right? That this generation had a when their parents zigged, boomers zagged. There's this skeptical nature to boomers that still persists even as you all mature through life stages. Gen Xers, again, the language is intellectual. Remember, heartbroken while brain is stimulated. Let down while you're empowered with knowledge. If you want to reach an Xer, you have to sound smart. You don't have to be smart. You just have to sound smart. You have to sound like you know what you're talking about. So last night, when I talked about proof that the biblical or historical Jesus is the biblical Jesus, and I gave these quotes about, Tacitus and Josephus and Lucian, I was exemplifying what it means to use intellect to speak the language of Gen Xers. All right, the millennials, that's my group. Our language is dialogue. Here's all that means. We're willing to listen to you only if you prove first that you're willing to listen to us. And I know for established leaders, Xers and baby boomers, that can be a headache. Trust me, I know. Because many leaders, Xers and olders, earned the right to lead, right? You earned it through coming up through the ranks, working hard, never quitting, having grit. Millennials expect to be heard even though we haven't earned the same authority that you have. And I know that can be frustrating. And I'm not saying we're right. I'm just saying we are. Right? It is what it is. If you could show a millennial the capacity to listen, you would gain from a millennial the opportunity to lead them. You hear what I'm saying? We'll listen if you first show us that you're willing to listen. It may not be right, it just is what it is. Dialogue is our language. We've always been able to talk back. We've always been able to text back. We've always been able to post our ideas on any subject, whether we have expertise or not on the subject aside. Our opinions matter too much to us, and we want to protect those opinions as an extension of our personhood, okay? All right, and then Gen Zers. If you want to relate to Gen Zers, you got to be relational. Here's what that means. You got to actually show emotion, be human, and communicate that in language. In speaking, the younger generations care more if you're human. The older generations care more if you're accurate. Older generations, in speaking, you don't have to be human. You just got to be right. Younger generations don't really care if you're accurate as long as you're human. And so if you can navigate that space and use that to your advantage, it will help you better speak the language of and ultimately influence the hearts of people of all generations. All right, let's go to the next slide. So here's a question. If we want to ask a question using each generational language, I'm going to step out of the way so y'all can take the picture. Here's what that question would look like. Elders want to ask the question, is it right? Boomers ask the question, if you're sure. Xers ask the question, Does it make sense? Millennials are going to ask, are you listening? And Zers are going to ask, do you care about me? Right? So if I'm leading, let's say I got a team meeting, and I'm the pastor of the church. That means I'm the boss of the staff as well, right? And I have people on my team of different ages, and I'm trying to communicate something as a team goal. If I can think about how to answer these questions in my presentation, I can better reach the people on my team who are of different ages. If it makes sense, the Xers may give it a chance. If I'm listening, the millennials may give it a chance. If I show that I care about the people I'm talking to, the Zers may give it a chance. If what I'm saying is right, accurate, needful, appropriate, those older than me may give it a chance. These are the questions the generations are asking, and as leaders, if we can answer these questions, we are better equipped or better able to speak their languages, all right? I'm gonna pause right here. Any thoughts or questions about the languages or what I just shared before I move on? I didn't do this in the last one. Go ahead, please. Yeah, so he asked about Gen Alpha. Now, to be fair, my research stopped at Gen Z because we could only do the experiment on generations who had an adult population, meaning they didn't need a parent or guardian to allow them to be experimented on, so to speak. So at the time, Gen Zers in 2019 were 18, 19, 20. So it had a few Gen Zers in the adult population. So this research won't reflect Alpha, but here's what I do think, all right? So I got a hunch, I don't know. Maybe the Lord will let me redo the research in 10 years to see. Right now, I see this as a continuum, okay? So right now I see this as linear. One generation influences the next generation. This generation understands that generation, but is different in this way, and it continues. So right now, give me your name. Phil? All right, Phil. So right now, in my mind, the way I see it, elders are propositional. Boomers are skeptical, even though they understand propositional language. That's what raised them. They are just unique from it. Their skepticism is a step away from proposition. Xers are now intellectual, more than skeptical. We're more than just asking the question, we're thinking our own thoughts, right? Because we were raised by the do your own thing generation. We're just one step unique from them. Millennials are more than just intellectual, now we're opinionated. You see what I'm saying? Now it's no longer what's true for you is true for you and what's true for me is true for me. Now it's live your own truth. We're a step away. We understand it, but we're unique from. And then Gen Z is straight relational. Now it's not just my opinion matters, my feelings matter more than your opinions matter. So we understand that language, we're a step away. Here's what I don't know. Because I read some stuff that says that Gen Alpha is a blank slate. And I mean that in the sense of sharing the gospel, that they are so far removed because of postmodernism. From Gen X down, there's not this mass discipling of American people. There are more people who are uninitiated to religious things. And the opportunity we have with Gen Alpha is a blank slate to disciple them because they don't have their parents and grandparents at this point may not really be religious in general. You picking up what I'm putting down? Okay, Phil. So to answer your question, I'm really nerding out right now, but to answer your question, I don't know if Alpha is going to be the next step down the line or if it's going to be cyclical and come back around. You get what I'm saying? Here's why I don't know. Because the language, the culture that shaped the language of elders is deeply rooted in the Great Depression. You hear what I'm saying? And we don't yet know how the global pandemic might affect the sensibilities. And I don't know if the pandemic, like the Depression, for a blank slate generation would start it over or just move it one step away. Does it make sense what I'm saying? So, you have what now? Oh yeah, naturally. Here's what I would say. I would start with the Gen Z sensibility, relate to them well. So I'm assuming their parents are millennials. So I'm assuming you love your grandkids and hate your kids. No, you don't have to say it. You don't have to say it. You don't have to say it. I said it for you. It's fine. So for your kids, for sure, anything you can do to create a dialogue space where you show that you at least understand their point of view, you can definitely better connect with them. For the Zers, relational. Relate to them in a way that you humanize yourself, right? Where they see you as person before position. That don't mean that you're not grandpa. It means you're human before you're grandpa. That don't mean I'm not pastor. It just means I put down pastor to pick up Darrell. I'm Darrell. I only pick up pastor when I need to. That's how you better relate to the younger generations. Only pick up the authority when it's absolutely necessary. Don't let the authority and your personhood be the same, because you won't be able to connect with them. Alphas, I don't know yet. We got to let them come of age, kind of see what communication trends shape the way they receive messaging, and then test it out. And I don't know what the next step past relational is. I'm going to be honest. I don't know if it's going to be cyclical and come back around to propositional. You know what I'm saying? So that's a great question, though. Go ahead. Well, yeah, so the opening quote about the West, I think that generational stratification, or let's just say classification. So when we say generational stratification, what we mean is we separate people by these groups. I think the West did that to try to better understand culture. Right, I think it's true too. Now, also my research is just in America, right? I don't know how this will play out in an African country or Middle Eastern country. It doesn't have that kind of reach. It's just in Western culture. I think that we have these generational groups to better understand people. Now, here's a couple things I did learn about sociology or about generations from sociology. A generational group can't span longer than 20 years. The idea is a parent and a child shouldn't be in the same generational cohort. The longest gap in time is boomers, 18 years, 46 to 64. I think is our culture's way to not just subdivide people, but understand how people are shaped and how this group will move through life together and affect America as a whole together. I think that's the good of generational stratification or separating the generations. I think the bad of it is it can just be another demographic that makes us feel like one is against the other, like racial or socioeconomic or educational. You get what I'm saying? Did I answer your question? Kinda? All right, I'm gonna take two more, boom and boom, and then I'm gonna keep going. Isaac? I think so. So his question is the disconnect based off of experience? I think the disconnect is, by disconnect you mean the disconnect in generations have been able to relate to each other, right? I think it's based off experience. I also think it's based off of trying to figure out how to say this. I'm not blaming older generations. Let me start there. But what I am saying is the accountability starts with the older until the younger comes along to share that accountability. Does it make sense what I'm saying? I'm gonna use an analogy, then I'm gonna try to answer your question. Right now, I got my three sons, 17, 15, 10. They all have chores. We all share the accountability of keeping the house decent looking. When they were all babies, The responsibility was mine and my wife's. If dishes were gonna be washed, if clothes were gonna be folded, if floors were gonna be vacuumed, it was mainly us who had to do it. It was our responsibility until they aged into a place where they could share some of it. All right, you get the metaphor? I think the relational disconnect is older generations having a sensibility that that younger generations don't share. And you see, I'm trying to tiptoe through this. And both believing they're right and taking offense to the other one's unwillingness to see it their way. You get what I'm saying? So I'm not blaming older generations, because when I was a young millennial pastor on staff at a church, and I had a Gen X pastor with a boomer leadership style, I had to learn to understand him as much as I expected him to understand me. The disconnect wasn't him, the disconnect was us. And us being frustrated before we're willing. It's how you react to what someone does or doesn't do. That's the disconnect. Does it make sense what I'm saying, Isaac? Great question, man. Great question. All right, last question, I'm gonna keep going.
I was wondering about if the stratification of generations wasn't as pronounced, if you didn't know, before the Industrial Revolution.
No, it wasn't. So we talking about early 1900s, right? No, it wasn't. Great question. Here's why it wasn't. The concept of a teenager, right? We're not even talking about the life stages I just showed you. The concept of an adolescent, of a teenager, wasn't even a thing until about 1905. All right? So a teenager as we know it, meaning extended childhood, delayed adulthood, wasn't even a term until the early 1900s. And so I think pre-industrial revolution, it was child adult. If we could be, we're overly generalizing, but this stratification wasn't there. It was either you were a child or you were a fully contributing member to the house, the economy, the neighborhood, because I think an agrarian or agricultural society made it such, right? Industrial revolution, now you've got not just agriculture, you've got professions popping up, you got new fields of study popping up, new business components and types, you see what I'm saying? Plus the concept of a teenager, and America setting this legal age at 18 to vote and 21 to drink. Those affect the idea of a person being mature enough, right? So I'm gonna use this analogy, and I hope y'all picking up what I'm putting down. A girl can become biologically mature at her first menstrual cycle, and she may be 12. I don't think a 12-year-old should get married, but she's still not considered an adult fully until she's 21. So the concept of teenager extending her childhood until her brain can catch up with her biology or her body creates this pocket of teenager or generational stratification. Does that make sense? Man, that was a great question, bro. I feel like I just nerded out a little bit, but that was a great question. All right. All right, let's move on. I'm gonna get down the road. I'm gonna give you something credible you can walk away with. So here is how the language can influence the leadership. All right, so we start with language. Language is a tool of a leader. A leader uses language to influence. What I say shapes the reality of the people I lead, or it shapes the culture in which the people I lead have to live. So if I learn their language, I can better communicate our values as a culture. I'm not talking about manipulating. Y'all hear what I'm saying? I'm not talking about coercing. I'm talking about value shaping, culture creating. That's the work of a leader, and language is our main tool to do that, on top of just personhood, who we are, who we be, not just what we say, who we be. All right, so remember the continuum. The first one I showed you was elders to Gen Z. Remember that? Then we looked at the languages from propositional to relational. I believe the application in leadership style then is from authoritative to collaborative. Okay? Because propositional language is strong, firm, direct, unflinching. So is authoritative leadership. So were the most effective leaders of the last half century. So when we go back to FDR, let's just use him as a model of a great leader. Very much a leader who we talking about a man who had 3 terms, right? I got the right president, right? A leader who led this country through some of the toughest times. Very authoritative, very, strong in what we believe the leadership personify. That's just an example. But if we think about some of our pastoral leaders, church leaders, very much authoritative, strong, okay? But now if we're moving towards down this continuum where language is changing, so much leadership style. I think the frustration, Isaac, in leadership is when you want to be authoritative when you should be collaborative. And when you want to be collaborative when you should be authoritative. Okay? We all got a default. Older generation's default is authority. I'm in charge. It's just the way it is. I earned this authority. I was here before you. I've got boots older than you. Right? I've been here. I earned this. I sacrificed. Where millennials are demanding to be heard and authoritative leaders are like, no, you will do as I say or have nothing to do here at all, right? But then younger leaders like me who I want to be collaborative, but there's sometimes I have to be authoritative. There are some times where it's not going to be the group decision. Sometimes I have to know this is the right thing to do. I'll consider what the group said, but this is what we're doing. Being able to navigate what leadership style to use when helps us to better relate to people of all ages, okay? And I think there's a connection there from the languages down to the leadership. All right, son, go to the next one. Leaders must be willing to put the ship's performance ahead of their egos. The command and control approach is far from the most efficient way to tap people's intelligence and skills. To the contrary, I found that the more control I gave up, the more command I got. This is Captain Michael D. Abrashoff. He wrote a book called It's Your Ship. And I love this book because in an authoritative context like the military, he shows us how to leverage collaborative leadership to make his ship the best ship at the time in the fleet. I can't remember the name of the ship, but it's a great, great book. Captain D. Michael Abrashoff, It's Your Ship. If you want to grab it, I would encourage you to. I'm going to share a couple more books in the end, too. All right, let's go to the next one. Instead of constantly scrutinizing the members of my crew with the presumption that they would screw up, I assumed that they wanted to do well and be the best. All right, so as a leader, our beliefs about the people we lead come from our biases about them. So I'm gonna give you an example. Let's say you're leading a group of millennials. They're in their late 20s, and you believe millennials are lazy, right? Millennials aren't committed. If you believe that as a leader, that's coming from a bias you have about that generation. And that bias is going to come out in the way you speak to them, what you expect from them, opportunities you do and don't give. Now let's reverse that. I'm a millennial leader. I've got ladies in my church who are on our mother's team. That's what we call just an older, distinguished ladies in a Baptist church. I don't know if y'all have that in a Friends church. But if I believe that because they're all in their 70s, they don't have anything to offer, that's from a bias, we could call it ageism, of assuming that because their strength is less than it used to be, their capacity is less than it used to be, that's coming from a bias. And that'll come out in the way I lead them, which will greatly restrict their ability to have a net positive influence on our congregation. Does it make sense what I'm saying? So the belief in the people you lead and their potential comes from what you think about them, right? And so if we have any kind of generational biases, it'll come out in the way we engage with people of different age groups. All right, deal, let's go to the next one. All right, implement processes that people will enjoy carrying out. It's just a leadership ethic, right? That the processes reflect thoughtfulness, value-based leadership, culture-shaping leadership that give people joy to implement. All right, let's go to the next one. So, to be omnilingual, to be cross-cultural, to be a strategic or intentional leader. Now, when I say cross-cultural, I mean to understand the culture of a generation and be willing to see that culture for the good it can offer, instead of just assuming one's culture is the right culture or the only one. All right, go to the next one, son. All right. I cannot influence people I do not love, and I cannot love people I refuse to understand. That's what I thought was at the beginning. Let's read it together on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. I cannot influence people I do not love, and I cannot love people I refuse to understand. All right, what do we got after this? Some resources? Keep going. Keep going. Oh, all right. Here's how we can be intentional leaders, and this is all Jesus. All right, make a choice. Now, this isn't unique to me. This is Churches Growing Young by Kara Powell. I saw somebody at the hotel yesterday who mentioned reading that book, Churches Growing Young. Anybody ever read that book? It's a green book. Awesome book by Kara Powell and Fuller Institute. And they study these 6 things in common, regardless of denomination or race or region of the country, that churches who are reaching younger people are able to do. And making the choice to reach them was one of them. Go to the next one, Dylan. All right. Am I willing to adjust my leadership style and management approach to connect with someone of a different age than I am? That's the question only I can answer. If you're not willing, then you know that. If you are willing, that willingness will be a gift to you and a gift to the people you lead. Whether you're adjusting to reach people older or adjusting to reach people who are younger. All right? Make a choice. Model Christ. All right? Now, Christ, we're going to look at Christ as a acronym. Jesus was the greatest intergenerational leader. And I really believe that. All right? Jesus was a 30-something-year-old rabbi. And I don't know, what became the muse of some artists who paint his 12 disciples as these older men. But the 12 disciples were not these 40, 50-year-old men who were following Jesus. It is more likely that his 12 disciples were teenagers or in their early 20s. I'm gonna prove it to you. In Jewish culture, you couldn't even become a rabbi until you were 30 years old. So the Jewish educational system started with the Old Testament, with the Torah, right? These 5 books they had to learn. It wasn't just their religious books. These were their textbooks, right? Once you finish primary school, essentially is what we could call it, you had to audition to become a rabbi, to go to rabbinical school. You had to apply, so to speak. And let's say if around 13 in Jewish cultures when you become an adult, right? A boy would have his bar mitzvah, a girl would have a bat mitzvah, and after 13, they become an adult. They're marriageable age at that point, which means these young girls who were, maybe virgins are now eligible to be married, which would place unmarried virgin girls as young teenagers. So when we think about Jesus' mom, Mary, it's more likely that Mary was 15 than she was 32. Mary was really young, no older than 20 in general, right? Now, once you become an adult, you finish the primary school, if you want to become a rabbi, it's beyond just studying the Torah to now memorizing it, knowing it. And the way you would apply to become a rabbi is you would go to a rabbi who you wanted to follow, ask him if you could be a disciple of theirs, and this rabbi would say, okay, sure. Sit down, freehand, write the book of Leviticus out, freehand. Quote Exodus, the whole book right now. And if you didn't cut it to be accepted into rabbinical school, you would then have to go home and do whatever your father's job was or your father's trade, whether that's a fisherman, a carpenter, or a gardener, right? Y'all picking up what I'm putting down? To just start to sound a little contextual. So when Jesus finds these 12 disciples, he finds them having been rejected from rabbinical school. They were doing daddy's trade, fishermen. Many of them were, right? What does that mean? That means they couldn't cut it. They were rejected. And so instead of them choosing a rabbi, the rabbi chose them. Jesus flipped it on his head. And he went and chose these younger men. And it makes sense now. When you think about how thick-headed the disciples were, it makes sense that they were 22, right? It makes sense that they were, he's 19. I understand why Peter speaks before he thinks. Duh, he's a teenager. Okay, it all makes sense. He literally just performed a miracle in front of their faces and none of them understood what was happening. He had to pull them to the side and say, boys, listen. All right, so Christ is this intergenerational leader. Here's how he led. And I think we can all think of examples in Christ's life that reflect this kind of leadership. All right, and then maintaining connection. So when I say maintaining connection, here's what I mean from Kara Powell. Keep the lines of communication open. And key chain leadership. Key chain leadership is this idea from Churches Growing Young that really just played itself out in a very real way with my son, Dylan. Dylan just got his license 5 days ago. Took him to go take his driver's test. He passed the driver's test. Now my 17-year-old son has his license. Now, I've been the primary teacher in the process of helping him become a driver. What that means is I've had to move from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. His whole life, I'm in the driver's seat, he's the passenger. Now I'm in the passenger seat, he's the driver. The next iteration is I give him the keys and I let him take the car. All right, that's a whole lot different. I remember I used to take them to the grocery store and they would have these grocery buggies with little race cars on them to keep kids occupied while you're buying milk, right? You remember those? And the kids are sitting there turning the car and they think they're the ones turning the buggy. Now, my son is 17. He's driven a real car before. Can I take him now to the grocery store, put him in a buggy and say, okay, Dylan, you're driving. He knows that this steering wheel doesn't really work. This is not real influence. It would offend him at this point. The next step for him is key chain leadership. Give him the keys, let him drive. Kara Powell says that if we want to reach younger people in our churches and influence them, we've got to be willing to move from the driver's seat to the passenger seat, then be willing to move from the passenger seat and give them the keys and let them drive. Instead of giving them fake steering wheels to turn to tell them don't leave the church, but they know turning this wheel doesn't really influence our church at all, right? If we want to influence people of a younger generation, key chain leadership is a very important skill. What's interesting too is when you read my bio, bro, that's what happened with me. My church gave me the keys. At each stage of my life, more and more influence, more and more authority, and it helped me not just never leave my church, it helped me reproduce a disciple-making church from my church because I was trusted with the keys. All right, y'all, I'm almost done. All right, here's some resources I would encourage you to look up. Speaking Across Generations is my book. I got some copies out there. My book is more so about communication than leadership, but here's some leadership books that have really helped me. The Self-Aware Leader by John Maxwell is a good one. It's a good one. I've taken all the leaders in my church through it. This one might be one of my favorite. Lead Like It Matters to God. This book was written by Richard Stearns. He was the CEO of Compassion International, I believe, for years and years and years. And he wrote about just value-based leadership. Lead like it matters to God. Value-driven leadership in a success-driven world. As Christians, we're called to lead, but how we lead has to be cruciform, has to be like Jesus. All right, I'm going to pause here. How much time do I have, Nathaniel? Am I done? I'm pretty much done. All right. Any questions for me? Any questions? Any thoughts? Great question. Great question. So for those who didn't hear him, his essential point is young people tend to be young people regardless of what era they're young in, right? And once you mature, right, out of a young age, your sensibilities tend to change. I agree with that 100%. I'm gonna be honest, if there was one struggle I had with my research, I didn't know how to account for that with Gen Z at the time. I didn't know if they were relational because they were teenagers or if they were relational because that's their true generational culture. But all I had was the data I had to go on. Here's a couple things that I do know, and I try to keep in mind. The first thing is the development of the brain is telltale of a person's capacity to evolve out of immature activity, right? Here's all I mean. The prefrontal cortex is fully developed around 25 years old. It's the part of the brain we use to make decisions. So the hope is I'm a better decision maker post 25 than I was pre 25. That is something, regardless of generational group, is just a neurological reality, right? The other thing is, I think the life stage change, I was trying to keep in tension that generations have a culture, but life stages change the way those needs show up, and trying to know where to land between those two can be a tenacious activity. So you said you're a fundraiser, right? So what I would do, I'm actually speaking at a fundraising, using this same research to speak at a fundraising event in Chicago later this year, Lord willing, all right? What I want to say is, if I'm trying to write a letter to donors who are baby boomers, who I know are in their second adulthood and they want to make their biggest impact at this point in their life, I'm going to use the skeptical language to appeal to their generosity. Meaning, I'm gonna ask questions like, have you ever felt like your best days were ahead of you, but you just didn't know how to make the biggest impact? And you look in the community around you and the options are few for you to use your skill set to impact the next generation. Give us some money, because we'll, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I'm cutting across the field, but the point is I would use that language in the rhetoric or terminology or phraseology of my letter or my spiel or my speech, trying to also appeal to their desire at this stage in life to make a difference. That's a great question, and I'm trying to stand between the two. You know what I'm saying? Because immature is immature, whether you're a baby boomer, a Gen Xer, or what have you. Did I answer your question? Somewhat, kind of? All right, cool. That's a lot to think about. All right, last question. Yeah. Man, I could tell you just came out of a PhD program. That's a very thoughtful question. I'll answer it this way. So his question was about narcissism, particularly as an underbelly of baby boomer leadership. We're overly generalizing, but making the connection between the fact that baby boomers were pretty much spoiled by America. And as a result of that, narcissism can grow if unchecked. And it can seem right because it's just how it's always been, until that narcissism is challenged by the sensibilities of younger groups. Now, give me your name. Joe. I was joking through my presentation about baby boomers and millennials because we are the same, the pot and the kettle, right? The boomerang child with the helicopter parent, right? We're the Spider-Man meme, pointing at each other. We are mirrors of one another. And if millennials are not careful, the same narcissism we're trying to counteract in superstructures that were established by boomers or led by boomers, we could recreate in our own selfish way. Because the same way the world wrapped itself around boomers is now doing the same to millennials. I agree, I understand, I've experienced this narcissism in cultures, and I think narcissism could really follow autocratic, heavy-handed leadership can be a bastion for narcissism to flourish. The first thing I would say as a spiritual practice is my leadership has to be cruciform. What that means is I nail my leadership to the cross. Jesus was not a narcissist, right? So as a real Jesus follower, as a leader, my leadership style has to be more Jesus influenced than culturally influenced. That's the first thing I would say. You asked about spiritual practices. This is what has helped me. It's helped me in my marriage, and it helped me better relate to my bosses when I was under authority. Ask these two questions, and I think you can have more empathy for a person. What would be this person's deepest fears, and what are their biggest pain points? So we could criticize a narcissist, and rightfully so, until we go a layer deep and ask, what is the fears of this person that's led to this kind of behavior? And what pains has this person sustained that has probably gone unhealed and is festered into this kind of poisoned way of interacting with people? If you can better understand a person or people group's fears and pain points, I think empathy is like the outcome of that, right? So if men could better understand the fears and pain points of women, we would be more empathetic. You get what I'm saying? If people of one race could better understand the pain points and fears of people of another race, I think we would be more empathetic. If people of one generation could understand the fears and pain points of people of another, I think we would be more empathetic. Which is why, Joe, I showed the life stage needs. Because as life stages change, so do fears and pain points. And if I can better understand the fears of people in my congregation who are in their 60s, and a new pain they're facing in their 60s that they probably didn't have in their 40s, I have more empathy to lead them. Wonderful question. I hope I did it some kind of justice in my response. Listen, thank y'all for your time. Thank you for having me. Love you. God bless you.